Hey, it's Chris and Lisa from Been There, Got Out, and we're so glad you could join us today for our workshop, The Top 7 Dangers of Toxic Relationships. If you're here, you're probably having some difficulty in an important relationship in your life, and you're probably confused and wondering what the heck is going on.
Hopefully you've also taken our quiz and the results may have been jaw-dropping. If you had a ton of yes answers, it's very likely that your partner has something called a cluster B personality disorder. This includes things like narcissistic, borderline, and antisocial personality disorders. Both of us were in long-term marriages, had children with them, and still must navigate the waters with these people. So believe me, we get it. What took each of us years of unnecessary pain to learn was something so important and yet so basic, and we want to start by sharing it right now. The problem isn't you, even if you've been made to believe it is.
The problem is your partner. We use the term toxic to describe anyone who exhibits the behaviors we ask about in the quiz. We're not here to diagnose anyone, but these behaviors are not normal. Healthy people in healthy relationships don't usually act this way.
Maybe you're thinking, marriage is hard, relationships require sacrifice, or I need to work on myself. We thought those same things. We believed if we just tried harder, things would get better. But nothing you do, no matter how hard you try, is going to fix it. Toxic people might be able to change some behaviors in the short term, but it won't last, and it's never going back to the good old days from early in the relationship.
We found 3 key steps to dealing with toxic relationships. Step 1 is to understand exactly what's going on. If you're in a difficult relationship, it may be that your partner is toxic, or they could just be a jerk. You may have already figured this part out, or maybe our quiz did it for you. Step 2 is to learn about the dangers associated with toxic relationships, and that's the focus of this workshop. So let's dive in. By the end of the workshop, you'll understand the different ways in which your situation is dangerous, and when you do, you might finally feel motivated to take action.
After the workshop, we'll talk more about how you can do that with our 3-part Thrive Map program.
We have a lot of information to cover. To make sure you don't miss anything, please get rid of all the distractions. Put the phone away, close your email, shut your door, and basically get in do not disturb mode. If you have a question, please put it in the chat panel and we'll make sure to answer as soon as we can. Plus, we'll have a Q&A at the end. For this workshop, the chat panel is private, so only Lisa and I will see what you type. We'll also email you a link to a replay of this session in the next few days. The first danger is what we call the cycle of misery, and it's not just about being unhappy. It's more like feeling you're in such a rut that you have no hope of getting out. During much of my marriage, there was tension in the air. I was on pins and needles all the time, wondering when she was going to explode and how I might avoid it. I always have been someone who loved to laugh, always looking to crack a joke in any situation. In the last year or 2 of my marriage, I don't think I laughed at all. I would have never considered leaving, no matter how much I was suffering. The focus was always on her, and I was always in crisis mode. I never looked at the big picture.
I felt like the idea of divorce was so terrifying that it made me tolerate anything. I couldn't ever imagine myself as a single parent. After discovering that my ex-husband had been leading a double life for years, I was convinced that I could change him and that he would be able to see how important our marriage was. It became a routine. Every night when he'd get home, I'd spend hours pleading with him. You have a family. We have children together. How could you throw all this away for some fantasy? I was never able to step back and examine how much I was suffering or how all of this was affecting myself as well as my kids. Living with domestic abuse exposes us to physical dangers, even when it's not physical violence. Many effects are not as obvious, but can be just as, if not more, harmful. Victims of domestic violence often face a greater chance of PTSD, sleep disturbances, anxiety, flashbacks, depression, heart disease, gastrointestinal disorders, and overall poor health. When my ex-husband admitted to an affair, one of many I later learned, I also discovered that he was having unprotected sex with I don't even know what, putting my own life in danger.
Another important thing to realize is that even if you have not been physically abused, emotional abuse often escalates into physical violence over time. In fact, physical violence never occurs without some kind of psychological abuse.
I was married for nearly 18 years to somebody who didn't often get violently angry, but when he did, it was terrifying. Once, in the first few seconds of a verbal disagreement, he yanked a whole handful of my hair out of my head. Another time, he grabbed me by the neck, lifted me off the floor, threw me on the ground, and threatened to kill me. I later learned that this is called strangulation, and it is one of the most common lethal forms of domestic violence. This, as well as shaking by the neck, could have rendered me unconscious within seconds and killed me within minutes while my kids were upstairs playing in their bedrooms. A friend's ex-husband literally broke her back in front of her 4 children.
Certainly, living with physical violence increases our chances of being harmed, and the most dangerous time is trying to escape an abusive relationship. It is necessary to have a safety plan in place which requires outside and expert support, something you should never attempt on your own.
A big reason I and many parents stay in a relationship is because we want our children to grow up with an intact family with 2 parents, believing that if we could just wait it out, it will be better for the kids. Research shows that the opposite is true, and that it is actually more damaging for our children on many levels. By remaining in an abusive relationship, we as parents are modeling not just that abuse is okay, but that it is normal. Not only are our children witnessing a betrayal from someone who is supposed to be a protector, but the targeted adult really can't provide comfort and therefore can't be a buffer, much as we'd like to think we can. Children who grow up in homes with domestic violence, and I'm talking not just physical, but emotional and psychological, have a higher risk of poor health and a greater likelihood of anxiety disorders and depression. Because our children are dependent on us as their parents, domestic violence can feel scarier than war because it happens in a place which is supposed to be safe.
Let us share some statistics with you. Our own children are 1,500 times more likely to be abused in homes where partner abuse occurs, more likely to be absent from school, suffer from lower overall grades, and have a greater chance of dropping out of school, and they're more likely to become obese. Merely witnessing abuse to one's parent makes a child more likely to take on violent and delinquent behavior themselves. Children in homes with domestic violence have a 50% greater likelihood of drug and alcohol abuse, a 24% greater chance of committing sexual assault crimes themselves, 6 times greater chance of committing suicide, the second leading cause of death among Americans aged 10 to 24. Overall, recent research has proven that merely witnessing abuse carries the same risk of harm to children's mental health and learning as being abused directly.
The amount of money wasted when involved with, and especially when trying to get away from a toxic relationship, can be jaw-dropping. First, these relationships often involve what's called financial abuse. This occurs when your partner hides or steals money or restricts your access to it. Financial abuse occurs frequently during the legal process as well, as many abusers use both their attorneys and the courts as a weapon, forcing legal fees to spiral out of control. For me, it started with the thousands of dollars I spent on couples therapy during the last 2 years of my marriage. It was only much later, in my domestic violence advocacy training that I learned that marital or relationship counseling never works with toxic people and can actually do more harm than good, as well as waste a ton of money. Even a normal divorce can be expensive, but when you have to deal with an abuser focused on power and control, there's nothing normal about it. Costs can skyrocket faster than you can imagine. I thought my divorce would cost $10,000 and I worried about where I'd find the money. The bills ended up being 10 times that amount, not to mention all the lost wages from the time it took me away from my business.
My divorce cost $300,000 for no good reason. Abusers like my ex-wife try to retain power over you, and draining you financially is one of the top techniques they use. Unfortunately, the legal system makes it very easy for them to do this. They'll file motion after motion and insist on involving other professionals, like attorneys for the children, parenting evaluators, and parenting coordinators, many of whom are shockingly incapable of recognizing toxic people. Rescheduling court dates, asking for endless extensions, and swamping you with paperwork are all calculated strategies to run up your legal fees.
We know people who have literally spent millions of dollars trying to get away from toxic marriages, and others who have been financially destroyed. Luckily, I learned some very specific techniques that I wish I had known sooner, which I was able to employ in court post-judgment. Using what I learned has saved me, no joke, about $500,000 during the past 2 years in court.
When we talk about the danger of wasted time, we mean two different types. The big blocks of time, the wasted years of your life, and the smaller blocks, the hours and hours. We talk to people all the time who have spent 10, 20, 30, even 40 years of their lives in toxic relationships, subjected to abuse, and living a miserable life, often without realizing it. People get stuck in intolerable situations, and the calendar pages fly off. Years you can never get back. Years your toxic partner is sucking the life out of you. Protracted legal battles are not only expensive, but waste huge chunks of time. My divorce took 3 years, and Lisa is still in the legal system. 5 years later, simply trying to get her ex-husband to comply with their divorce agreement. Even after you get out of your toxic relationship, if you don't have a good plan and a great support system in place, it can take much longer than it has to get over the trauma and get your life back.
Now let's zoom in and talk about all the hours wasted on ineffective solutions. People in toxic relationships often spend months or years in couples therapy, which is utterly pointless and can continue even after the relationship ends if a co-parenting coordinator is part of the custody arrangement. People waste time arguing or discussing the relationship with their toxic partners. In the later stages of my marriage, I would spend 6 hours a day fruitlessly trying to reason with my ex. I remember feeling so guilty because I was neglecting my kids, and for what? Often, the biggest and most expensive waste of time happens within the legal system, when toxic people intentionally make things as difficult as possible. I've had to go to court more than 40 times in the past couple of years, each costing me at least several hours, not to mention weeks spent preparing, researching, filing motions, and responding to paperwork from the other side. I'm sure you're doing what I did, losing so much time trying to figure out why your partner acts the way he or she does. Think of how much mental energy this is taking up. You're so busy in survival mode that you don't have a moment to take care of yourself. Unfortunately, family court is not built to deal with the extreme behaviors of toxic personalities. As mediation tends not to work and you end up in the legal system, you need to brace yourself for what can easily become a nightmare. Most people, both of us included, were not prepared. The aggressive behavior and manipulative tactics of toxic people are frequently rewarded in the legal system. They will commonly disobey court orders without consequence, lie on the record, and their lawyers will too. And the court's typical lack of enforcement actually empowers them to behave worse and worse as they continue to get away with more and more. Using Photoshop, some toxic people forge bank statements and create incriminating photographs of you, which can be entered as evidence. Others level false claims of abuse, often accusing you of the very acts they are guilty of. This happens all the time, especially during issues involving custody. The overburdened courts have no time to figure out what the truth is, and judges quickly get fed up. They often blame both of you, believing it takes two to tango.
Your problems can start right from the beginning, depending on your choice of attorney. In situations like ours, it is easy to choose a lawyer whose ignorance of domestic violence is not only frustrating, but very expensive, as he or she fails to negotiate effectively. I went with one of the highest profiles attorney in my town, and she made all sorts of mistakes with an entire year of back and forth, accomplishing nothing in moving the case forward. In desperation, I tried another prestigious lawyer, and his passing the case between a couple of his assistants led to even more frustration and wasted time and money. The problem is not that any of them were bad attorneys, but that they didn't understand that my situation needed to be handled differently. Unfortunately, toxic people also tend to attract attorneys who are as problematic as they are. My ex's attorney not only lied on the record repeatedly, but attacked me personally throughout the 3-year battle.
I had a wonderful, empathic divorce attorney, but just as things started progressing, and even this took over 6 months, my ex fired his first attorney, and in stepped another who I was told was notorious for being uncooperative. Her lack of professionalism led to confusion and dragging out the divorce process even more. She actually advised my ex to completely stop paying child support to save on taxes, a mistake he ended up paying for later. Regardless, within the next couple of months, his attorney's actions led to my own legal fees shooting up over 300%. After a full year of agony and my having to take out several loans, my lawyer advised me to deal with college expenses for our 2 other children later, just to get the divorce agreement signed and us out of the system. Now, years later, and as predicted by my attorney, I have been back in court. It's been over 40 court appearances in 2.5 years that I've had to spend just trying to get my children's father to abide by the divorce agreement. But this time, I've been able to represent myself and, using other resources, save enormous amounts of money, which would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees alone.
Judges themselves can be wildly inconsistent and unpredictable. The morning my divorce finally settled, the judge pegged my child support payments at one amount. When we came back in the afternoon, though, a new judge arbitrarily increased it by $700 a month. That one random twist of fate will end up costing me $90,000 in total.
There are so many areas you need to pay attention to legally, and you need to play an active role in your own case, which is more than what most people are expected to do. If you're able to avoid trial, the settlement agreement is extremely important. My attorney was very conscious of this and was sure to put in protective language, which actually allowed me to build a successful fraud case against my ex years later.
My experience was the opposite. There is one seemingly innocuous clause relating to summer vacations in my agreement, and its vague language has opened the door for my ex to continue to ruin our children's time with me every year, and has also cost me thousands more in legal fees. The devil is in the details, and a toxic person will exploit them if you leave anything open to interpretation.
I know it seems impossible to picture. because I was in the same position as you are now, but your future can improve. Just know that unfortunately, it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. Extracting yourself from a toxic relationship is a harrowing experience. Many of us will be dealing with the aftermath of trauma. Some say it takes such a long time to heal from emotional abuse because even after you physically get away, the person's voice is still in your head. This will take time, patience, and lots of support. Like I said earlier, I didn't think I'd ever be able to trust again. I didn't feel like I'd even be able to function. But here I am, years later, feeling healthier, happier, and more hopeful than I've ever been in my life. Such a weight has been lifted.
By being here, you have called in the cavalry. You're going to need support, and unfortunately, the people closest to you can't provide it because they just won't understand. They may offer simple suggestions, but have no idea of what's actually involved. It's not their fault. Your situation is extreme. These circumstances are often so irrational that most people can't fathom what you're going through. Logic just doesn't apply.
By taking the quiz and being here in this workshop, whether you meant to do it or not, you are on the brink of accessing a community of people who have been through what you're going through and who get it. We've got you. We're not going to be your entire support network, but we're going to be the first piece, and we're going to help you build the rest of what you need. We're going to guide you through this faster, cheaper, better, and with less pain.